reason I wanted to be here was because Anne is also probably one of the nicest people I know. And I think there are things you do because someone is a remarkable academic colleague. And I also think there are things you do as well because they are a truly wonderful person. And from the applause, Anne, I think you can tell everybody else in the room thinks exactly the same way. You're everything about you is fabulous, and I think that you treat everything from your friends to your professional work with such I don't know what you call it, just as well as professionalism, a degree of kindness and generosity that just creeps through it all. So I am really delighted to just be standing here and emceeing and introducing the other people who are going to really contribute to this afternoon. So first of all, having said all those wonderful things about Anne, and I'm sure there'll be many more things said today, I would like to introduce our official launcher of Anne's book, Larissa Berendt. Now, Professor Lisa Berendt is a woman from the Uleri and Gamilaroi people. She's a professor of law and director of research at the Jumbunna Indigenous House of Learning at the University of Technology, Sydney, and she was admitted to the Supreme Court of the ACT in New South Wales as a barrister. Larissa has written extensively on legal and Indigenous social justice issues, including her two books, Aboriginal Dispute Resolution and Achieving Social Justice. Her first novel, Home, won the Queensland Premier's Literary Award and the David Unaipon Award, and the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best First Novel in the Southeast Asian South Pacific region. Her second novel, Legacy, won the Victorian Premier's Literary Award for Indigenous Writing 2010. And amongst her other works, she is also the author of Indigenous Australia for Dummies. Larissa is the perfect person to be launching this book, and I'd like to introduce her to you now. Thank you very much, Larissa.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you for that acknowledgement of country as well. I was very honoured when Anne asked me to launch her book, Giving the Country a Memory, Contemporary Aboriginal Voices of Australia. And I'd had the privilege of reading it when it was in proofs to see if I'd like to make a comment for the cover. And I did and this is what I said. I said, a powerful interrogation of some of the most important and potent Indigenous voices in contemporary Australian literature. But I reread the book when it arrived. I still cannot be convinced that ebooks will replace actual books. When you like them, you just love them and they're like a little friend. But my comment from the back of the book was a bit of a spoiler alert, because I really do admire what Anne's done with this book and her approach to the subject matter. The one thing about Anne that I've come to know in my exchanges with her over the years is that she's profoundly committed to the deeper understanding and motivations and messages of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander writers and their writing. And this book looks through at the thoughts, lives and work of seven eminent and significant Indigenous authors, including Kim Scott, Romaine Morton, Janine Lane, Melissa Lukashenko, Marie Munkara, Alf Taylor and the phenomenal Doris Pilkington-Garamara. As Anne mentions in her book, once upon a time people only read Sally Morgan, and that's changed profoundly since those days. And this book gives a slice of the alternative talent and the alternative voices that can now inform a broader Australian and international public. What I think comes across in the book, and it is really one of its engaging charms, is that Anne comes to her conversations not so much as a critic, but as a reader, and you get the sense of her genuine curiosity and her quench for information and understanding. One of the things also that I admire about this book is that even with the people that I've known for a really long time, I've found out things about what they think, how they approach their work, and what they intend their work to convey that I've never known before. I was reflecting on how long I've known the lovely Romaine Morton, and yet I learnt so much from what she had to say to Anne about her craft. And similarly with Melissa Lukashenko, you can sit beside people on endless writers' festivals panels or chat over a meal, but somehow Anne, in the interview sections of this book, manages to really craftily wheedle out of people things that might not otherwise come out in an unstructured conversation. For instance, all the time I've known Romaine, I never knew that she loved Asterix comics as a child, read Coleridge and Dunwall in high school, and even now has a thing for Dylan Thomas. But you also learn about the people you don't know. And I actually feel like I know Janine Lane now, like I was the one sitting down with her and really listening when she talked. Now I know she doesn't really know me, but I feel like we have a personal connection now. And the way that she describes the catharsis of writing after the death of someone so dear, of the sense of responsibility we often feel as Indigenous writers for making sure the experiences of our family are not forgotten, and needing to find a way to pay tribute to that without disclosing family secrets that should probably stay buried or would be too cruel to reveal, all really resonated with me. Now, Janine, because you don't know we had this conversation that we had in our head, I just want to say that I've got a book coming out next year where I revisit Coonadoo and Patrick White, but we can talk about that later. She talks about that. Anyway, Anne's book is also a great reminder about what an important approach to research and subject matter interview is, especially in this space of literary criticism, because you get to hear precisely what the author thinks and means in their own words. And I enjoyed seeing how this style of approach actually privileges the perspective of the Indigenous interviewee. In my own work, I've been increasingly interested in how you move from the mediator, interpreter and advocate for someone to how you empower them to speak within their own voice, and it's been part of my emerging interest in filmmaking. But what I found really refreshing in Anne's book was a reminder of how interview can really be a way that we can do that within a written form. But she matches those interviews with erudite, reflective essays that are a response to her deep listening, her drive to truly understand what's being said. In those pieces of her own writing, Anne is very aware of concepts such as unconscious bias, cultural assumptions and white privilege, and you can feel lying underneath that Anne seeks to decipher not just what an Aboriginal writer can tell her about Indigenous experience, but what their perspective tells her about non-Indigenous complicity, privilege and responsibility. What comes through, I think, is the way that she understands that Indigenous literature is consumed in a cross-cultural environment where the reader may well have more privilege and power than the writer. Anne delves into her personal essays with a responsiveness not just to the work, but also to the person and their humanity. She interrogates not just the words of the writers and their ideas, but their spirit and their heart. A real treasure in this book is the chapter dedicated to the now departed Doris Pilkington Garamara. I've written a lot about Doris myself, her writing, and I even wrote a book about the movie based on the book, Follow the Rabbit Proof Fence. But within Anne's conversation, we're reminded of Doris's fierce intellect, what a determined researcher and user of the archive she was, and a dedicated writer. And we also learned that of all her books, Under the Wintermara Tree was her favourite, which I didn't realise. But we're also privy to her fascinating discussions about how the historical archive and other people's memory can trigger your own memory as a writer, sometimes forcing the writer to remember the things in their own family history or past that they may have deliberately tried to suppress. And we also get a deeper understanding of how, for Aboriginal writers, the craft is not just about storytelling, but is also about healing. And that says much about how different the place is that Aboriginal writers come from to where a non-Aboriginal person might if they were writing. And it also says much about what the Aboriginal writer wants her readers to receive. From speaking with Anne, and as Kathy says, she's such a lovely thing, so you might not suspect it, but with the book she has a hidden agenda. And that is, through material like this, that more people will want to teach Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander literature. It's a strange phenomenon that sometimes the failure for Indigenous material to appear in educational curriculum is not that teachers think it isn't important, mostly they do, but they're not confident about teaching Indigenous material because they're quite aware that their own education about Indigenous issues was impoverished. So providing materials that people can use to understand subject matter that they can then teach or use as teaching materials is one of the most effective ways of ensuring that Indigenous writing has a chance of being picked up by educators. And I think that was part of Anne's cunning plan. And it's a good one, and it's a plan that deserves to succeed. So I'd like to congratulate Anne. This is a great book that adds enormously to supporting the renaissance of Indigenous writing that we're so lucky to be going through now. It allows the writers who are featured within the book a platform, and it allows us to better understand the diverse literary strategies that they employ and to find the threads that kind of draw disparate Indigenous writing together, the connection to the ancient culture and its oral histories, and also the use of humour, described by Janine as a relief or release and by Alf Taylor as pulling the leg of the reader. These warm, insightful interactions with some of the leading contemporary Aboriginal writers of our day and the accompanying mediations and reflections contained in Anne's essays are an important step forward in the deeper understanding of Indigenous writing and the promotion of Indigenous literature as Australian literature. As Janine observes in her interview, it's been the support of non-Indigenous scholars and critics, like Anne, who have promoted this new wave of Indigenous literature, and certainly Anne has been at the vanguard of it. And now I'm going to go home and tuck this little tome on the shelf in my study that has books by many of the authors featured, something you can't do with an e-book. I think there is an e-book version coming out, but you'll be sorry if you don't buy one that you can hold in your hands. And congratulations.
Thank you very much, Larissa. Now I'm going to ask Anne to come up and speak for a few minutes about this, and I feel, having been so gushing at the beginning, I now need to make sure I give her biography appropriately. So Anne Brewster teaches at UNSW. She's worked many years in the field of Aboriginal literature. Her two earlier books are Aboriginal Women's Autobiography and Literary Formations. She also co-edited with Angeline O'Neill and Rosemary Vandenberg an anthology of Aboriginal writing. Those who remain will always remember, an anthology of Aboriginal writing. Giving This Country is the product of almost 10 years of interviews and critical work. So Anne, please come and speak to the work you've just done. Thank you.
I just take my glasses off. Larissa, thank you so much for such a wonderful, warm, generous launch. I'm really, I'm speechless. Well, rhetorically, that is. Thank you so much for reading the book so carefully and reading so many of the interviews carefully and reflecting on them. Your own work has been so important to me, especially your work on sovereignty and gendered violence. It's work that I go back to again and again. And of course, your fiction has always been a great inspiration to me too, and I really look forward to your third novel, which you tell me is coming out in 2017, and your book that's coming out next year on Eliza Fraser. Yeah. So I'm just so humbled that you've agreed to launch my book and in such generous terms. Yeah, thank you so much, Larissa. And thanks, Kathy. Thank you very much for agreeing to MC. You've also been an inspiration to me, and I think you're one of the nicest people in the world. So, and I'm so thrilled that you were here in Sydney now that you're dividing your time between Sydney and France. So I guess I need to thank Cambria also. They've been absolutely fantastic to work with. They've been so professional. This book has come out in Susan Lever's Australian Studies series, and when I gave her the book proposal, she got back to me like within weeks and said yes, 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 and this was such a relief to to me after having had it with another publisher for quite a long time. So Cambria have just been fantastic to work with. Michelle Wright, who's the assistant director, has been really prompt and so communicative, and they've just been fantastic. And I'd also really like to thank all the people who have worked with me on preparing the book, because several people are here today. So Lynn Vellens, I don't know if Lynn's here, but Michelle Levin's here, who has done a lot of the transcribing, and has been a lot of it. Some of these interviews were hours and hours long, so it's been a lot of work. And also Rose Arong, I don't know if Rose is here, but Rose has been a fantastic research assistant. But the most important and heartfelt thanks go to the writers who gave their time to talk with me at length about things that I was really passionate about, and just was so generous and so was so resourceful, and took me in directions and took me on journeys that I hadn't anticipated. This was such an exciting way to do research. It really is. It opens your eyes to all sorts of things. I found in the interview process that sometimes you had to discard your plan. You know, you had all these questions you'd thought about for weeks, and you put them to a long, complicated question, and the writer would just say, no. Or yes. And you think, okay. So then I think, right. And I'd often go away and reflect on what they had talked passionately about themselves, and kind of then come up with a new set of questions. So this is why with these people I often interviewed them several times. So I would like to just thank them very much for their generosity, but also just for the gift of their literature, the gift of their writing, their contribution to the field of Australian literature. I always say that when I travel overseas, I'm really struck by the fact that Aboriginal literature is probably the best known branch of Australian literature overseas. People, I'm sure Janine would agree with me, people are so passionate, so interested in Aboriginal literature, not just in Australia. And it's fantastic to be working in such a dynamic field which can tell us so much about our history and the legacies of that history. And that's why I've given the book the title that I did, Giving This Country Memory. It's some lines from Alexis Wright. Michael told me not to give a speech, but not to give a lecture, but once I'm in front of a microphone, there's just a few things I'll say. I won't give you all afternoon. But I just wanted to say that something Larissa said was did feel quite strongly about that. At any point in time, it seems that we just focus on 2 or 3 Aboriginal writers, and it used to be Sally Morgan and Ruby Langford, who are wonderful, wonderful writers. And now we tend to focus on a couple of other writers. And there is this other group of very good, fantastic writers that I think don't necessarily get as much exposure. So one of the reasons for doing this book was to kind of broaden that canon a little bit, and to familiarise people, to introduce people to writers that they perhaps hadn't read much of. But also, in the meantime, those writers' own careers, I think, are moving at a pretty meteoric rate, like Janine's work, which has been taken up in many places overseas, and Marie Mankara, who's got a memoir coming out with Penguin. So it's I did want to contextualise their work and make it accessible, provide entry points into it for other people. I'm very sorry that most of them are not here today. Only Janine can be here today. I'm so thrilled that she came up from Canberra. But Melissa and Marie live in Brisbane, and Doris has passed away. Alf and Kim are in Perth, and that leaves Romaine, who's in Melbourne. So nobody lives in Sydney, strangely enough. Anyway, I'm so glad that Janine's here today, and I've found her work a great inspiration to me too. And Janine, like many other Aboriginal scholars, has been demonstrating that, has been raising issues about how non-Indigenous scholars can work together with Indigenous scholars to develop appropriate parameters for the work on non-Indigenous criticism and analysis and readings of Aboriginal literature. So we're all very lucky to have this body of critical work from people like her and Larissa, who are both incidentally are prize-winning novelists themselves as well. Anyway, so I'll just finish now, and I'd like to thank everybody for coming. It means so much to me. This was a very, very long project. The first interview in the book was done in 2005 with Doris. So I know several friends have come up from Canberra, and there's my various buddies from Wollongong, that distant metropolis. So, and I know it's a fairly expensive book, but if you're not going to buy it, could you please order it for your library? So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Anne. Now we're going to hear from Janine Lane. Janine is a Wiradjuri woman from southwest New South Wales. Her first volume of poetry, Dark Secrets After Dreaming, AD 1887 to 1961, won the Scanlon Prize for Indigenous Poetry. Her collection of stories, Purple Threads, won the David Unaipon Award at the Queensland Premier's Literary Awards and was shortlisted for the 2012 Commonwealth Book Prize and the Victorian Premier's Literary Awards. Janine is a researcher at the ANU. And I should also add, I just spent a month in China with Janine, and she's a formidable writer in terms of sharing the word about Indigenous writing. It's just wonderful to see you in full flight. So please welcome Janine.
Thank you, Kathy. I'd also like to acknowledge the Gadigal people on whose land we're gathered today, and to thank Larissa for that launch speech, and Anne for writing the book in the first place, because not only is she contributing or raising awareness of the breadth of the Aboriginal canon that is there, that I'm afraid a lot of people are aware of, but also providing an important resource for the teaching of Indigenous literature, because Larissa mentioned we are in a renaissance at the moment of Indigenous literature, particularly Indigenous women writing. There's a bit of a gap between that and what's there and what's being taught, so books like this are really important. So I'm going to share just 3 pieces with you this afternoon from, these are all new poems, not the ones that Anne wrote about in the book. And they're forthcoming in a collection with Cordite Press, which is a collaboration between Indian Dalit writers and Australian Indigenous writers, and there's some cross translations there as well. So I'll read you 3 poems that are going to be part of that translation. Now the first one is called Piece of Australia, P-I-E-C-E, Piece of Australia, and it was inspired by a history conference that I went to last year, where someone actually someone who was chairing the panel actually felt the need to give a bit of a history of the history conference before they did their chairing. And in that little spiel they said, you know, one of the reasons for having this history conference is to commemorate that Australia was founded in peace. And I know they're not representative, but you know, that's still an all too common kind of myth about Australia. So this one's called PIECE of Australia. I'll have to read it pretty slowly because the light's not so great. In the 21st century, settlers were still saying, Australia is a nation found and founded in peace. But which peace? Port Jackson, Botany Bay, Parramatta, Hawkesbury, Rushcutters Bay, Windsor, Georges River, Port Phillip, Risdon Cove, Derwent River, Hunter Valley, Illawarra, Riverina, Brindabellas, Moreton Bay, Dawson River, Atherton Tablelands, Bathurst, Adelaide, Swan River, Perth, Darwin, Macleay, Clarence River, the Kimberley. Which peace? Black Wars, Mile Creek, Masca Island, Ludd Hall, Murdering Gully, Mistake Creek, Coniston Station, Umbali, Battle of the Pinjarra, Blackline, Slaughterhouse Creek, the Bushwhack, Tyrone, Kilcoy, Kalkaldoon, Maralingo, Arabanu, Pemulwuy, Tedbury, Jandamarra, Gudgegal, Winderden, Yagan. In which suburban backyard, rural block, museum, university or science laboratory do these bones lie? We're still looking for pieces of us in Australia, and each piece matters. Punitive expeditions, pastoral leases, martial law, protection acts, missions, reservations, assimilation policies, stolen children, forced removal, institutions, deficit theories, mining booms, blue range rockets, uranium, incarceration, deaths in custody, gaps in health, education, employment, housing, justice, suspension of the Racial Discrimination Act for Aborigines, intervention in the Northern Territory. Which piece are they talking about? Which piece of Australia was founded in peace? Another one, second one is called remote community. Because I started thinking a lot about the relativity of the term remote and what is remote from where. And it's got a lot of Aboriginal names in this one, so you have to forgive my punctuation, but it's important, or pronunciation, sorry, but it's important to mention them. In 2007, by the colonial calendar, commands were given from afar. Suspend the Racial Discrimination Act for Aborigines. They can't handle their rights anyway. Troops marched in. Then Al Palerman, Amagira, Bathurst Island, Boorman, Echo Island, Gappawick, Gove Peninsula, Gulbanyanya, Hastes Bluff, Hermansburg, Imampa, Jay Creek, Kudajutta, Kintor, Vajai, Maralinga, Manangrida, Mudajulu, Mount Theo, Nambawa, Pampaway, Papunya, Ramiljan, Tikajara, Tintajai, Utopia, Wadai, Warramengai, Yarralin, Yirrkala and Unamendu all came under the dictatorship of a remote community on Capitol Hill called Canberra. And last one is called Cardboard Incarceration. And this one was inspired from some work I'm doing on a recent project which involves working in an archive or some archival research. And the archive at this particular library, but I think it's like all archives, was creepy in a way, a bit like a morgue. So this is Cardboard Incarceration. This cardboard prison they call an archive is called airless and silent as death. Floor-to-ceiling boxes contain voices no longer heard yet still wailing within, and faces no longer seen yet still missing in a jail of captured snippets, images and memories like the severed heads and bleached bones of dismembered bodies neatly locked away in the vaults of museums and universities of the world in the name of science, history, anthropology or something else that was so important at the time that it justified the collection of bits and pieces of the other. Reams of records tell how you measured our heads with every Western yardstick, examined us through your voyeuristic lens, scrutinised the children's fingernails under microscopes and found them remarkably